Okay, should have been enough time for the sound to do its magic. I'm streaming, kiddo. I told you I was going to be. Alright, we're just continuing with the coloring page that we had started last week. I'm looking to finish it today if possible, but we'll see. Right now, we've mostly got areas that are going to be purple left. And then I still need to figure out what I'm doing with the horn. So. Cat close on. End of pin. Okay, so. Cat hair does not go in mouth. So, I'm never quite sure what colors the coloring page people intended for areas to be, but I suspect it's one of those cases of death of the author, where it doesn't really matter what they intended, because what matters is what the person doing the actual coloring intends. I mean, there are plenty of cases where people take a coloring page and they do something completely different, like they overdraw on it and make it so that, it looks completely different than the original coloring page. One of my favorites that I see people do that with is there's one out there where it's meant to be a pinup girl, and people overdraw the image, which was meant to be, showing someone having sex with either her mouth or her back end, and they overdraw it so she becomes like a spy or an astronaut. All of these really cool scenes. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with being, sexually active or anything like that. But the original intent was extremely objectifying of the drawing woman. And it's nice to see the number of people who can take that objectified scene and turn it into something very, I guess empowering is the right word. Something that turns her from an object into a person, her own person. I don't know. For me, it's cool. For others, they might be looking at it and going, yeah, but she's still a drawing. It doesn't really matter what she looks like. Well, no, it doesn't. But for the people who are overdrawing that picture, obviously it does matter. And death of the author or not, if something matters to somebody, then it should matter to them. And they should be given credit where credit is due for being creative with it. There we go. Now you guys can see a bit better since my hand's not covering it as much. Okay. If I can finish the unicorn today, and in a reasonable amount of time, I might pull out some yarn and see how well this will work for crocheting. just am not sure, because I tend to hold my crochet close against my chest, and I would prefer y'all not be staring at my chest. At least not until after I've gotten my upcoming top surgery. Which, update on that, turns out that the gender therapist had sent an email, my support letter via registered mail. He's been refusing to send it any other way for a very long time now. Turns out that since the last time he'd sent a letter to this particular surgeon, they had changed the company the name of the surgery practice. So there's a very good chance that letter never reached them. And he has, after discussing it with him, agreed to finally email it, which is what they've been wanting to do all along. And he's been like, no, that's not secure. There's a chance it could get to the wrong hands, etc. Well, there was a chance it could get to the wrong hands with the registered mail, too, and it might very well have, since it did not ever reach them. But does not appear to have returned to him either. So, he will be emailing. I just have to send him a small form that basically says, here is my consent to allow you to email my information. And once that is done, which I have forgotten to be doing because I've been busy, but once that's done, they'll have that, and I'll be good to go for my consultation that is scheduled for June 3rd. Once I have the consultation, sorry, my munchkin keeps staring at me because he's in the room, he's wearing headphones, and he can, hello Mervin, but he can hear me talking over his headphones in his game, so he keeps thinking I'm talking to him, and I'm not. But anyhow, back to what I was saying. There is hopefully going to be progress. I'm hoping that after the consultation on the 3rd, I will finally be given a date and can start making travel plans. I've already got wonderful friends in the area where the surgeon is who have basically said, no, you're not paying for a hotel. You're staying with us while you're recovering and before the surgery. Another friend who is in the area is planning to take me around and show me the sights prior to my having surgery, and then if I feel well enough to go out before I return home after the surgery. I do tend to, it takes me a while to recover from things, but surgeries I tend to be up and about and acting normally within a day or two, so hopefully. Like, I wasn't quite up and about and acting normal after my tonsillectomy in 2019, but that's because normal involved me talking a lot, and I couldn't. So that one was, but I still worked the following week, and that working was like lots of working. I was at the time working on calls, and I was also supposed to be doing the QAs for my team, but I would never have time to do the QAs because I would be too busy having to take calls. Well, that week, since I could not, flat out, just could not talk, my boss said, well, just do the QAs, which I was like, how can I work while I'm without a throat? And my boss was like, I don't know. I mean, do you want to just take a week off? And I'm like, not really. I don't want to take time off if I can help it, but I won't be able to talk. And he's like, okay, well, just do the QAs. That was the most productive week for QAs. I got every single one done. And then that was when he pretty much decided that he was going to move me to overnight shifts as soon as the opportunity arose. And once I moved to overnight shifts, I pretty much every week got my QA metrics met. Everybody got QA'd, everybody got a personalized message afterwards explaining, hey, here's what you did great, here's what you did wrong, etc., etc. Here's what we'll need to work on in the future. And it was wonderful. And then the company that we were working for basically went, no, we don't want one of your agents doing QAs. We want somebody else doing them that's dedicated to doing nothing but QAs. And then we stopped getting QA'd completely. And my boss finally, after a month or two of that, went, can you go back to doing QAs? And I did, until eventually the company that we worked for sold to another company, and the other company said, we've got our own internal QA person. And they switched us to a different account entirely. But since getting moved to the other company, which was in last June, so almost a year ago, I have had one QA in that whole time. And that was the first month. And haven't had one since. So I'm kind of just sitting here waiting for my boss to go, yeah, we're going to take you off the phones and put you back on QAs. Thing is, I don't think he's going to be able to do that for a while, because after moving everybody to home, working from home, we had some people who were taking advantage of that and not actually working. So my desk of 50 people lost 20 and is down to 30 people. And that 30 people, as we're all working very, very hard. When I was setting up my timesheet on Monday, because we do our timesheets every Monday, and we schedule them out for the whole week. But when I was setting up my timesheet on Monday, I realized that the last time that I had a week where I did not get overtime without having had to take a day off for something was in February. I have been working overtime every week since February, along with, managing a household, dealing with prepping for surgery, and various other, things going on in my life. So it's no wonder that every now and then I just kind of get burnt out. Okay. This part here is ridiculously intricate and delicate because there's all of these tiny little... it's a braid. And per every artist I've ever met, drawing or coloring braids is just so intricate, so delicate, and according to at least one that I can think of off the top of my head, so awful. But, I've had others who are like, no, I love drawing braids. I love it, it's amazing. One of my favorite things because it's rhythmic and soothing. But every artist is different. I've never met any two artists who agree on this is good, this is bad, or even this is fun, this is not. So, I think I'm going to do this outer part over here, which means moving this over. There we go. Oh, Actually, before I do that, there's one spot that I noticed last week that I had failed to do. There's an ear here. That ear should be silver like the rest of the unicorn. Okay, there we go. So there's that. Okay. I still have not figured out what I'm going to do with that horn. I might make it gold. Okay. Now, I'm going to do this outer part, and then I'm going to flip it over again and work on the inner parts. Because I'm trying not to end up with my hand covered in glitter again, though obviously I'm failing. I will say that next time I do one of these, probably not going to use these gel pens. I will probably use colored pencils, honestly. I honestly like working with colored pencils more than pens normally. The effects of the gel pens are, as we can see, gorgeous. They're shiny. Kind of makes it hard to see some of it because it is so shiny. I wonder if I do this. No. Maybe I just need to put like a baffle over this or something. I'll figure it out another day. Okay. There we go. This coloring book, by the way, has many, many beautiful coloring pages. And it has some drawing steps, things like that. But we will get to those later. I might even try drawing things. Drawing is not my forte. I have many, many talented artist friends, and I normally just leave the drawing to them. Coloring isn't really my forte either, because I don't see colors quite the way that I'm supposed to. But something like this, where the colors are, very bold and very distinct, that's easy. I used to, back in college, have people who were convinced I was excellent at coloring, because what I would do is I would find art, mostly things like comic book art or drawings from D&D, fantasy novels, things like that. And I would print it out in grayscale, and then I would just take colored pencils and I would draw or color over it. And so all of the shading and things like that were already done for me. And I would put them up on my door or on my walls. And my dorm was a particular, it was not just whoever in a dorm, it was a particular program we were all in, and we were all interacting constantly, so everybody knew each other. And basically, people got to seeing me doing that, and they were like, oh wow, can you do one for my door? And so we ended up with pretty much the entire floor of the dorm that we were in. Actually, there were 2 floors, but so pretty much both floors, every single door had one of my colorings on it. And then the actual dorm rooms were set up as apartments, and it was for people per, and each one had their own separate room inside the apartment. And so, inside each apartment, there would be another 4 coloring pages on the doors. I think I still have some of those old colored pages somewhere, because I'm a pack rat and I keep almost everything. Which wouldn't be so bad if I didn't live in a fairly tiny house with 3 adults and 2 kids and no storage space. Thankfully, drawings are easy to store because they're flat and they're thin, and you just pile a bunch of them in a notebook. There you go. But we're getting to that point where no matter what I do, you guys aren't going to be able to see past my hand. Trying to figure out the best way. Oh. Closing this from it. Can you see okay if I do this? I think you can see okay. Okay. This might make it a little easier. Maybe. I might end up cutting the stream a little short. I really do want to finish the whole page today, but we'll see. But it depends on if a friend of mine who has also been feeling a lot of cabin fever, my partner has been feeling a lot of cabin fever because they're used to going to restaurants and going out and visiting their family, going weekly to a particular game store to play Warhammer, having our friends over once a week to play D&D, which all has basically not happened due to pandemic. So we haven't played D&D as a group in over a year now. We've been to one sit-down restaurant since the pandemic started, and that was as a very special treat for the twins. We all wore masks when not sitting at our table. I was very tempted to just get up and leave because they put our table less than 6 feet from another table, and that table had a bunch of people, none of whom were wearing masks. And we still, even then, waited for my partner and I to be vaccinated, but at that time they didn't have a vaccine for our kids. So what we did was we made them sit against the wall as far from the other table as possible. And again, wear masks whenever we weren't eating. But there was a bit of a row between my partner and I this past week. There were a couple of them. Because there's apparently some movie that my partner wanted to go see in the theaters, and he wanted the twins to come with because he really doesn't like going places and doing things alone. And for him, it's a case of cabin fever being really bad. But um, I am working that day. I come down, and one of the twins looks up and goes, "We're going to go see a movie with our other dad." I'm like, "Is that wise? You guys aren't vaccinated yet." And my partner, um, apparently me just saying that and then letting them know that, hey, we'll be getting you guys vaccinated soon. I found a place that's doing it for your age group. I just have to arrange the appointment. But my partner got very upset because after I left the room, apparently the twins were like, yeah, no, it's not smart to go out and go to a movie theater if we're not vaccinated yet. And so they were refusing to go, and my partner got very upset because he had been really looking forward to going to the movie with them because he's desperate for things to go back to normal. And I'm not quite sure how to get it across that normal isn't ever really going to be a thing again. We've lost too many people. Too many lives are just gone. You can't just pick up after a society goes through this and just pretend nothing ever happened. There are people who still haven't had a chance to even mourn those that they've lost. Haven't even had a chance to bury them. And I mean, these are people that they lost over a year ago. It's just this huge cultural trauma. And it's going to take time. A lot of time. And it's definitely going to take change. Certain things are going to have to become a norm, like, oh, I've got a cough today, I'm going to wear a mask. Or, ooh, I don't feel good today, I'm going to stay home from work, or I'm going to work from home. Things like that. Those are going to have to be a norm for us to prevent this ever happening again. And, I mean, you'd think we would have learned by now. This has happened before. But we didn't. We as humans, we can store up memories. We can know this has happened before. We can know this is what we had to do to prevent it from getting worse. And yet, sometimes we just kind of look at the past and go, oh, well, no, not listening to those lessons. And sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it's good that we look at the past and go, yeah, no, not doing that again. But it's also sometimes we don't look at the past, or we look at the past and we go, no. And we don't learn the lessons that would have been really, really useful in the present day situation. Like, people assume that the anti-vax movement is this new thing, but it's not. There have been people who have been refusing to get vaccines since there have been vaccines. And people assume that things like COVID are a new thing, but they're not. The virus that COVID is a variant of has been around for a very, very long time. We actually, not too long ago, saw it before in SARS. They're the same family of viruses. That's part of why the vaccine could be prepared so people say quickly, but no, it really wasn't. Because we'd seen it before in SARS, and we'd started the research then on the mRNA vaccine. The groundwork was already laid. And all that was really done differently was this time we had multiple governments throwing money at it, and technology is advanced to the point that we could do concurrent research. So we could have multiple people working on the exact same thing and just doing different little bits and bobs of it, so that they could all then shove it together at the same time. And oh look, we have a working vaccine in what to a lot of people seemed like an incredibly short amount of time. It really wasn't. Like, this has been something they've been working on for literal years. It's just that they finally had the funding to get a decent working version of it. And now, of course, we have people going, well, I'm not getting it because they rushed it. But they didn't. And we've got people who are going, well, I'm not getting it because it changes your DNA. No, it doesn't. It causes a few cells where the vaccine was put in to very briefly produce a particular protein, the mRNA protein, that is used as the outer covering of the vaccine, of the virus itself. And those cells, they produce it for just long enough that that your body now recognizes this as a unfamiliar thing. And your white blood cells do not like unfamiliar things at all. They see something unfamiliar and they're going to go smash it. And so they recognize that unfamiliar mRNA and they beat the crud out of it. And then 2 weeks later, you get another shot. And they see that same unfamiliar mRNA, and they beat the crud out of it. And this, by the way, is why the second shot in the versions that use to tends to make you not a lot more sick. Most people are barely getting sick. They're getting some stiffness, soreness, maybe a mild fever, okay? Most people are not getting super sick from this. But the reason why that second shot is always a doozy is because now your body recognizes that mRNA and goes into fight mode a lot faster and a lot more powerfully. Basically, you getting mildly sick from the vaccine is just showing that the vaccine's doing its job, has done its job. Because what we're trying to do is trigger an immune response. And we're able to do it without even having to inject a dead or weakened form of the virus. And that is amazing. We have come so far from the days when Edward Jenner scraped pus and blood off of milkmaids who had cowpox's wounds and smeared it onto open cuts of children, mostly. He mostly tested this on little kids because scientists were not good at understanding that, you kind of want to test it on grown-ups first. He did test it on himself at least. But we have come so far in how we handle viruses and immunology than those days. And it's made such a huge difference in human lives. We have almost entirely eradicated smallpox, which, by the way, was what Edward Jenner was trying to fight off. He was trying to prevent people from dying from this horrible disease of smallpox. And he'd noticed that, these milkmaids who had come down with cowpox never seemed to get smallpox. And so he took pus and blood and other disgusting things from their wounds that they had gotten from cowpox, and he opened up wounds on people who had neither cowpox nor smallpox, and smeared the pus and blood into those wounds, and the people got cowpox. And then he exposed them to smallpox, which was at the time a virulent, raging infectious agent. If you had been exposed in any way without having been inoculated by the cowpox, then you were not going to get away without getting smallpox. I mean, it just wasn't going to happen. You were going to get it. And depending on your age and your health, you most likely weren't going to survive it. If you did, just like with COVID, you were going to end up with a lot of horrible, horrible side effects that would be with you for the rest of your life. Smallpox was a murderer. It was the horrible, horrible virus at the time. And he figured it out. He figured out immunology without even knowing what a virus looked like. He just knew if people got this one disease, they didn't get this far, far worse disease. And so he checked and saw, if I infect people with this one disease, then they don't get the other horrible disease after, even when exposed. And my God, no shade to the virus researchers now, but they are standing on the shoulders of a giant who, admittedly, was standing on the shoulders of other giants before him. And someday I am sure there will be other researchers standing on the shoulders of the giants that are our current viral researchers who discovered the way to create the mRNA vaccine. A lot of people think that science is this smooth, linear progression, that we go from this to this to this to this to this, and it just goes. But science is this messy, halting thing where we try one thing and it works or it doesn't, and then we try the next thing and it works or it doesn't, and we just keep going, and it's not linear. Sometimes we do things one way and then we go, oh crud, that doesn't work, or that doesn't work well, and so we do something else. And does it work? Does it not? Eventually, we will realize that we have found what we think for now is the answer. And sometimes it is. But science is not immutable truths. There's that saying, if you're looking for truth, go down the hall to Professor it was from one of the Indiana Jones movies, but science is a search for facts. It is not a search for truth. Truth is a constant. Science is not. Facts aren't even. We know things today that we thought we knew 100 years ago, and we didn't. What we think is true is or what we think is right, what we think is fact, is something that has been tested, something that we have tried over and over and over, and it's come up the same answer most times. I'm not even going to say every time, because things happen. But an actual scientist knows that what they thought was fact today could be proven wrong tomorrow. We thought for years and years and years that the sun was a gas. And now we know it's a plasma, which is a different state of matter. We thought for years and years and years that there were only 3 states of matter: solid, liquid, gas. Now we know there's plasma. There's 4. And there's potentially others. We just aren't certain yet. We know currently that the human body contains something called junk DNA that you cannot trace back to one of our common ancestors. And we don't know where it came from. We really don't. We're trying various ideas, various thoughts, but we can't even say this is what makes us human. Because those things that make us human contain things that we don't know what they are. We thought for many, many years that humans were the only creature with the ability to speak. But we've seen that, birds can actually mimic human speech and understand it. They're not just mimicking, at least in the case of things like parrots. They can form new concepts, new ideas, and change their articulation of them. We've seen similar research with things like Coco the gorilla. She could take an idea, a human idea, and change it to fit her needs. And that's really impressive. I'm not entirely sold on the put buttons with words down and teach the animals how to use those words and then claim that that animal is speaking, because it is not as reproducible as some say. Once it has been researched further, I'll have a better idea. Do I believe that the animals included are potentially communicating? Yes. Do I think that the animal actually understands that this written word on this written button means this thing? Or is it a case of cause and effect? If I step on this button here, I get taken outside. I don't know. Animals are smart. I just don't know if they're quite at that point. Funny thing, I'd believe it more if instead of dogs and cats it was pigs. Because pigs have been shown to be highly intelligent animals. Heck, I'd believe it if it was an octopus. Octopus are not only intelligent, but they're spiteful. One of my favorite stories from a marine biologist, regarding octopus, I should say, because there's so many fun stories if you listen to biologists, period. But this one marine biologist, he had an octopus in a tank, and he gave it a serving of shrimp every day. Well, one day he'd given the octopus its serving of shrimp, and he then went back to his desk and was working away, and suddenly a shrimp landed on his desk. Just landed there. And he looks up in time to see the octopus that he left in his tank, going out of the doorway and heading back down the hall towards where the tank was. And he looks at the shrimp. Well, first he gets up and goes to make certain that the octopus gets back to its tank correctly. But when he checked the shrimp, it turned out that one of the shrimp he had given the octopus had gone bad. And the octopus apparently had been displeased. Well, this is putting human emotions on an animal, which we should not do. That is anthropomorphizing, and it leads to far more trouble than people realize. It leads to people being convinced that their dog purposely poops on the bed to spite them, or their cat, only breaks things when they're mad, things like that. This is not true. The dog poops on the bed because it is excited, and it also needs to go poop, and your bed just happens to be where it was when it had that urge. The cat breaks things because the cat wanted to push things, and cats are agents of chaos. Anyhow, but the octopus, apparently, I'm going to try not to assign emotions to this, but apparently realizing that the shrimp was bad, returned it by climbing out of its tank, carrying the shrimp down the hall to where this person's office was, and throwing it onto their desk. I should hope that the researcher then got it a shrimp that was not bad, because, that kind of display deserves a bit of a reward. Another fun one was a marine research station that had multiple tanks, and their fish kept disappearing. And they couldn't figure out why. It was always happening in between guard rotations. And it was enough fish that they were starting to run into issues of losing out on research. Well, they finally were able to set up cameras in such a way that they discovered that one of their octopus was climbing out of its own tank, crossing over to one of the fish tanks, climbing into that fish tank, having itself a nice snack, and returning to its own tank in the space of time between guard rotations. And that's impressive. That is incredibly impressive. Like, it had to have a sense of time. It had to have a sense of routine. It had to know, upon the guard walking away, that it had this much time to move from its tank to another tank, eat, and move back before the guard returned. It had to have a sense of knowing that it would be in trouble and would be prevented from doing this again if it were caught. There is an intelligence to the octopus that most people do not realize. There has to be. I mean, what other... Now, do I think it's a human intelligence? No. Do I think it might be, that it has the potential to be on par? Well, yes. The problem with most of our methods of ranking intelligence in animals is we're not ranking them against tests that are built for them. We're ranking them against intelligence that is based on our understanding of what intelligence is. If you ask a fish to climb a tree, and you base intelligence on how well it does, then you're going to be convinced that all fish are stupid. If you ask a fish to move an item from one spot to another, well, that's going to depend on the fish. There are fish who do that all the time. And so if you present them with that kind of challenge, they do great. But if you present that kind of challenge to a different fish that isn't from a species that moves things around, then they're probably going to struggle a bit. But they can learn it if they feel inclined. This, by the way, is why so many people think that cats can't be trained. They're trying to train them to do things like what dogs do, like play fetch. But that's not what a cat might be inclined to do naturally. And you're not providing enough of a reward for the cat to want to do it. It's not that, cats aren't intelligent enough to learn tricks. Just, you're either not choosing tricks that they would want to learn, or you're choosing tricks that are outside their skill set. We recently moved to feeding one of our cats who is very much in need of losing weight by putting her food in a ball that she has to roll around to get the food out. And it took about 3 days of showing her that we needed to roll the ball to get the food to fall out. But now she consistently can get every bit of food out of it, and it just takes her longer to eat. Instead of her, gorging and then throwing a fit because she's hungry again for the next X number of hours. You can train them. You just have to find something that they want to learn, or in her case, that they needed to learn, and they'll learn it. I'm pretty sure she did not want to have to learn how to use the bottle, because she is not particularly interested in exercise of any sort. She will briefly play with a toy if you play with her. And then, when she wants to, she will suddenly be like, I'm going to play with this one particular toy for hours, and I'm going to just bat it around and jump and play a ton. But she also is very given to, I'm just going to lay on you. I want to cuddle you. The big thing with cats is most of what you're wanting to train them is what you want to train them not to do. Such as you want to train them to only use the litter box, as opposed to just going to the bathroom wherever they want. You want to train them not to jump up onto food preparation surfaces, which can take quite a bit of work. We had one cat who would always get up on food preparation surfaces because they were taller, and she wanted to be up high because she wanted to be where the humans could pet her more easily. But she also really, really dislikes being picked up. So eventually, we figured that out, and anytime she got onto a kitchen surface, we would pick her up and put her on the floor again. And at first it didn't seem to be working, but then we realized if we pick her up and hold her for a minute, which she really dislikes, and then put her down, she would come to realize that if she was going to get on that surface, she was going to get picked up and held. And so by doing that consistently, anytime we saw her jump on the kitchen counter, we broke her of jumping on the kitchen counter. There are other things you can teach a cat to do or not do. But you have to watch their behaviors and figure out how to teach them based on those. If you've got a cat who you, as a kitten, noticed really loves picking up and carrying paper balls in their mouth, and loves chasing after them if you throw them, then you have a cat who can potentially be taught to play fetch. But if your cat is not interested in paper balls, or likes to chase them but never picks them up and carries them, then you're probably not going to be able to teach that cat how to play fetch. Because the skill set that is needed for fetch, which is chase thing, pick up thing, and bring back thing, isn't there. If you've got a cat who really loves to hide in places and spring out, then you've got a cat who can be trained to effectively play peekaboo. Because the skill set's already there. It just needs to be focused. I saw a video recently of a dog who had discovered that any time that his human went up a particular staircase, he could startle them by jumping out when they had reached a certain point on the staircase. Now, most people think that this dog is trying to scare the human. And in fact, that was what the video was labeled as, was dog was that the dog scared the human. But the thing is, the dog was not trying to scare the human. The dog was trying to play with the human. Because, for a dog, surprise, especially being surprised by a friend, is a very exciting thing. And a very happy thing. And you could tell by watching the dog's body language after it scared the human that it was so happy because it had surprised its human. It would, upon startling her by jumping out, spin in a circle while wagging furiously. Just the happiest thing. But the dog's intention, if we can assign an intention to an animal, was not to scare her. It didn't think it had scared her. It would see her startled reaction, and then she would immediately start talking to it in a happy voice. Because of course she was happy to see her dog, and she was happy to see how happy her dog was. And the dog had thus decided that the human liked to play, much like dogs like to play, by being startled. But there are some who would think that the dog was being mean because it was startling the human. Because we, as humans, recognize that not every human likes to be startled. Some of us really, really dislike it. It is, for us, scary. But the dog doesn't know that. And the dog certainly doesn't have any sign that it had malicious intent, if one can even say that dogs do, because one would have to understand malice. This was a dog that was playing with its human, and had found what seemed to be a very fun game for both of them, at least as far as the dog can tell. And I'm betting that the first time it happened, that the dog just chanced to scare this human. The human reacted with startlement, and then went, oh, and something similar. So of course the dog interprets this as my human liked it. Dogs are very, very praise-devoted. They love to be given praise. They're very eager to please, because we've trained that into them. They come from a pack animal, and all we've really done with domesticating them was transfer the urges of the pack into a human family, as opposed to another group of canines. That's one of the keys with domestication of animals, by the way, is when you want to domesticate an animal, you really need to find an animal that that meets certain requirements. We really never should have domesticated the horse. They don't meet a lot of the requirements for a good domestication. needs to be an animal that lives naturally in a family environment or a an environment with others of its kind or others of other kinds. Um, so herds, packs, things like that do great. People like to say that cats are solitary. Cats are actually not a solitary animal. By nature, they form what are called clouders, which is a group of cats. Um, and they can be massive. And they're largely made up of members of the same family, but they can and do, in like feral cat colonies, take in other new cats that quickly become acclimated and accepted into the group. They're a social animal. Just most people don't realize that because they don't show socialization in the way that we recognize it as humans. Like, people always say cats are so aloof. Cats don't like people, or they don't like each other even. Cats do. They cuddle up together regularly. But one of the things that always seems aloof to humans is the fact that they will often sit across the room from you and just watch you. But they're protecting you, in their view. They are watching you to make certain you're safe, and they will often turn their back to you because they know that you are going to prevent them from being attacked, and therefore they can trust you. So they're watching for danger from one direction, while they assume you are watching from danger from another. A cat sitting with its back to you is not a cat that is ignoring you, or a cat that is snubbing you. It is a cat that is saying, I trust you to keep me safe, so I'm going to sit and watch the other way. Dogs, on the other hand, again, social animal, but they show much of their socialization by being close together, by cuddling, by being in physical contact. And we, as human social animals, also show affection in similar ways. We hug, we kiss, we hold hands. And so, to us, dog socialization seems far more social and far more human. But, like, animals that are easy to socialize or to domesticate tend to be animals that, again, live in group environments because we're going to need them to live in group environments, whether that group environment is a human home where they are the only member of their group, or a farm situation where they've got a whole herd of their kind that are all being kept as farm animals. Sheep, cattle, horses, etc. The reason I say that horses were a terrible idea for domestication is they are an incredibly skittish prey animal. And their response to fear is not a good match for human society. Like, cows are not that skittish by nature. They're a very stolid animal. They're even aggressive when it comes to, well, depending on the cow breed. If it's a milk cow, we have actually bred those over many, 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 many generations to have very little interest in their own calves, because we are protecting those calves. We don't need them to protect the calves, and if they're being protective, it's going to make them very hard to milk. We've also bred them over many, 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 many generations to produce far more milk than is necessary for one calf, or even two. There is a dairy farmer that I follow online who, they don't actually sell dairy. What they do is they've got some cows, and those cows, they breed, they get them so they're lactating, and then instead of continuing to breed them, they just buy calves that would otherwise have been, sold to a finishing plant, is what they're called, which is where they let the calf grow until it's a certain size, generally, 6 to 8 months for a beef calf, because that's when a steer, a male, a fixed male beef calf, is going to have grown to a size that they're going to be decent meat. You don't just butcher a male calf as soon as it's born just because it's male. That's a waste, because they do not have enough meat on them to be really eaten. But what this farmer does is they buy these calves that are not going to be, extremely useful to a dairy farm, and they raise them by letting them nurse off of the already lactating cows, which actually makes things a lot easier both for the dairy farmer, because they're not having to feed these calves with milk from the dairy, and then when the calves are large enough, the person that I follow sells them to a finishing plant where they are fed on grain or grass as they grow to large enough that they are ready to be butchered. And so it means that their cow that is currently lactating does not have to go through the pain of drying off, which is the process when they stop milking a cow and she continues to produce milk until such a point as the milk not being removed results in her stopping producing milk, which is very uncomfortable for the cow. For anyone who has been around a cow that is in need of milking, it is very unpleasant for the cow. They regularly will develop what is called mastitis. In fact, most cattle will not develop mastitis on being milked. If the milk is being removed, they're not going to get mastitis. But if they aren't, that's when they normally get mastitis. I grew up on a farm, and we had a cow who, she only actually ever had one calf. She was not a milk breed either, so she was not a dairy cow. She was a rather horrific mix of Brangus, which is Brahma and Angus, and Texas Longhorn, and then a tiny bit of milk cow in. And for some reason, my parents bought her at auction and were convinced she was going to be an excellent milk cow. She was not. She produced enough that our family always had milk. My mother was even able to make butter from the milk, but she was not of a good temperament for milking. we had to take some rather bizarre steps to make her milkable. Namely, we had to take her and create a pulley system in... That's not going to work. A pulley system in the milking shed, where we would put a rope around her back hips, just in front of the udder, and we would put the rope up through the pulleys, and then we would have to lift her hind legs off of the ground. Because if we did not, then the minute you tried to milk her, she would start kicking, and she would stick her foot direct in the bucket full of milk. If you lifted her hind legs up like that, she couldn't do that. So it was the only way we could milk her. And, I mean, we didn't ever have to feed her calf anything, because she handled that, and she still had plenty of milk for our household. Even beef cows will regularly produce more than a single calf can drink. But we don't milk beef cows because we have not, or mostly we don't, my family was a bunch of idiots, but we have not bred them to not be hyperprotective of their calves. So when we try to milk a beef cow, they get angry because they don't want you anywhere near their calf. Which is good. We want that because dairy cows spend most of their time on pastures and in barns, but those pastures are fairly close to human habitation. Beef cattle do not. They, in fact, very rarely even have a barn. They are raised entirely on large pastures where they have, a cow, a beef cow, will be serviced by a bull. She will not be artificially inseminated, which, by the way, artificial insemination is much better for the cows. A bull will literally break a cow, okay? A bull, a naturally serviced, natural service is dangerous for cattle because of the weight and violence of the bulls. Beef cattle, it's easier to let them be naturally serviced because it's very difficult to get them in and keep an eye on them and see, okay, they're going into heat, time for artificial insemination. With a dairy cow, they're already right there every day to be milked. In fact, they can even, certain milking parlors are set up in a way that the cow will actually be able to just walk up and step into a stall and be automatically milked by a machine without any human interaction. And they will choose to do that because milk feels uncomfortable. You can ask any breastfeeding woman, in fact, human woman, just how uncomfortable it is if she is in milk and cannot feed her child. It's very uncomfortable. Okay, we have just finished with our unicorn, unless I want to color the... You know what? I think I am going to. The diamonds are going to be silver, but they are going to be colored as well. So one moment. What an odd turn of conversation, randomly going off on a tangent about dairy farming. Then again, as just about anyone knows me, my conversations are always fairly random and disjointed, so... anyhow, though. But it's just easier with beef cattle to leave them out on the range, let a bull naturally service them when they go in heat, and the calves are born with no human interaction, and for the first several months of their life, probably will never have seen a human. So it's a good thing that beef cattle don't have the rather lackadaisical response to their own calves, because they need the protection. Unlike dairy cattle, where the calves are born in a barn, generally with a human watching, to make certain that everything goes well. Those calves are then removed from their mother, because the mother will sometimes reject their calf because they have no instinct to be motherly. The particular dairy farmer that I follow just has had the incredible luck of getting not one but two cows that are both incredibly motherly, and will, in fact, and do, steal calves from other cows so that they can nurse those calves. It's very odd. Not a normal thing with dairy cows at all. But, hey, means that the babies get fed, and the cows seem to be happy because they've got all of these babies that they can take care of. And the dairy farmer can raise the bottle baby calves, or raise the calves without them having to be bottle baby calves, which take far more work, but that's why dairy farms often have multiple employees, because they have to feed the calves colostrum from a stock tank of colostrum. They don't let the calf have only its mother's colostrum, because by using a stocked tank that has multiple cows' milk in it, all of it colostrum, they ensure that that calf gets the most high chance of being immune to things. Switching back to just chatting now that we are done. Okay. Let's go ahead and... ta-da! Oh, that washes it out terribly. It looks... I never realized that it's practically grayscale. I should probably fix that at some point. Anyhow, so we talked about differences in dairy farming versus beef farming. We talked about coloring. We talked about my having pretty much decorated my entire dorm's first floor. What a wild ride my conversations tend to be. Okay, but I do have stuff I need to do today. I finished the coloring page. That was my goal. So I do think we're going to end the stream here, and I will see people next week. Actually, no. I should be back to streaming at 2 a.m. Thursday morning for Tor, and then I will be back again next week around roughly the same time. I'm shooting for 12 o'clock noon, but that is assuming that I wake up before noon. My alarm is set for noon because that's when I get up on work days, but there's always the chance I wake up early on work days. In fact, I wake up at about 11:30, even though my alarm's set for noon. It's very annoying. But I hope that everyone has an excellent week. Be kind to each other. Be kind to yourself. I'll see you next time.